Welcome back to lesson number 7. We're studying the return of Christ. Let me mention again, in case you missed some of my earlier teachings, if you want to contact me, you can send an email to strength2escape, one word, lowercase, at yahoo.com. And I'll be glad to take any questions. If you're just wanting to argue with me, please. Get enough of that as it is. If you've got any serious questions, I'll be glad to answer them. I'm going to tell you right now that our lessons are abbreviated, every one of them, and there's a lot of information that I'm having to skim over, just leave out basically, in order to get some of the highlights out for your own personal study. My desire is that, as in the book of Acts, the Bereans, as they were being taught certain things, they went to the scriptures to study these things out and see if the things that were being taught were so. And that's what I'm going to ask you to do, is before you get on your computer, study what I'm saying. And right now we're just moving from the starting gate, and we're just barely getting started with our study. As we get further along, as we get more studies behind us, you'll see that some of this stuff will start to make more sense. Now, there's a lot of challenges that I have, that you have, a lot of traditional doctrines that have crept into the church. We're going to be dealing with some of those here pretty soon in this set of lessons on the sabbatical pattern. Let's go ahead and get started. Colossians chapter 2. Paul has something to say about the Sabbath. So I've written the scripture up here. It's a very important scripture. He says, therefore, Colossians 2, verses 16 and 17. Therefore, let no one act as your judge in regard to food or drink, or in respect to a festival, or a new moon, or a Sabbath day. Now these, of course, were Jewish things, and we all know that after 70 A.D., we're no longer, well, as of the cross, we're no longer under the law. But the law could not be fulfilled without the temple and the officiating of the priests and the animal sacrifices. And of course, in 70 A.D., all that came to an end. He says, in respect to a festival or a new moon, or a Sabbath day, but listen to what he says next, things which are a mere shadow of what is to come. The Sabbath day is a shadow of what is to come. So, when Paul wrote this in the first century, and the end of that scripture is, but the substance belongs to Christ, or the body belongs to Christ. Paul is suggesting to the readers of the New Testament that these holy days, these festivals, the new moon, and he included the Sabbath day, is a shadow of something that's yet in the future. Hasn't happened yet, has not occurred yet. Now there's a similar scripture in Hebrews chapter 4. Let me start reading in verse 1 and go down through verse 9. The writer of Hebrews, therefore let us fear, lest while the promise remains of entering his rest, any one of you should seem to have come short of it. For indeed we have had good news preached to us, just as they also, but the word they heard did not profit them, because it was not united by faith in those who heard. For we who have believed enter that rest, just as he has said, quote, as I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest, although his works were finished from the foundation of the world. For he has thus said somewhere concerning the seventh day, quote, and God rested on the seventh day from all his works. And again, in this passage, they shall not enter my rest. Since therefore it remains for some to enter it, and those who formerly had good news preached to them fail to enter because of disobedience, he again fixes a certain day, today, saying through David after so long a time, just as has been said before, quote, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. For if Joshua had given them rest, and he certainly gave them the Sabbath rest, which from our previous study in number 6, they enjoyed the 7th day rest, but they wouldn't give their land the 7-year rest. For if Joshua had given them rest, he would not have spoken of another day after that, sometime in the future. Now, key verse number 9. There remains, therefore, a Sabbath rest for the people of God. Now, when you look up the word Sabbath, it does not really, the way we commonly think about it, we think of taking your leisure, kicking back in the backyard in the lounge with a iced tea and watching the clouds float by. That's really not what the word rest means. It literally means a cessation, an end of work. And that's pretty much it in a nutshell. Now, what we're dealing with here in biblical terms is what scholars call numerics. Numerics is simply denoting a system of how numbers work in the Bible. We all know how the number 7 plays out as being the number of perfection, completion, God's number. 6, the number of man. There's a repeat of the number 40, 40 days of Jesus in the wilderness. There are many places that the number 40 figures in. All these numbers do have significance. Now, not to be confused with numerology, which the Bible forbids. Numerology is a study of the occult significance of numbers, and it has no biblical basis. And we don't assign any more than the clear biblical understanding of numerics. So let's go ahead at this point. I have a timeline drawn on the board. This timeline, if you have a study Bible, there's usually in the back or the front someplace, there's a page with a little bit better chart than what I've drawn for you. But this shows the basic breakdown. There was an Irish priest, his name was Usher, in the early 16th century. He had access to archives of ancient books and cuneiforms and tablets. And he did the chronological timeline that most Bible scholars today recognize as a definitive work. You can go online, Google Usher and the timeline of the Bible, and his name will come up repeatedly as being one of the most accurate chronologers of the timeline of biblical things. Now, he started from the birth of Jesus and worked his way backwards through time with what available literature and such was available to him. And he could go back approximately 4,003 or 4,004 years to Adam. Now, in his writings, he doesn't suggest that the world started then. He says in his notes, there's just no other information to delve any deeper, any further back. He's not saying the earth was created 4,000 years before Christ, but that Adam was. And so his timeline, and he charts different events. Scholars don't question his work. What we want to take notice of is that for each section, starting from Adam, that after 2,000 years comes Father Abraham, the father of our faith, the man to whom God made some promises, and he confirmed those promises with an oath. And we find that 2,000 years later, we have the birth of Jesus Christ. And as of the year 2000, we're now 6,000 years removed from Adam. So you can see that on the board, how that breaks down. Now, just prior to 2000, roughly 50 years, 1948, 52 years before, Israel became a nation. And then a few decades after that, in 1967, as we were discussing in our previous series of studies, we have the Six-Day War, where the Jews took Jerusalem back from the hand of the Gentiles. Luke 21:24. Fulfilling the scripture, the question in Matthew 24:3, tell us what is the sign of your coming. Now we're at 2011, and as I noted in our previous studies, that from 1967, a biblical generation, approximately 40 years, takes us to 2007. So we're somewhere between 2007 and another date that's, you all know what I'm talking about, 2012, December 21st. Most people ascribe it to the Mayan calendar. Well, the Mayans were not the first. They were probably one of the last to come up with that date. It's just that there's been a lot of studies done concerning the Mayan calendar. When we get into that section, we're going to explore that much deeper. So what is it about this 6,000 years? I'm going to go ahead right now and give you the key. The Bible talks about keys. Jesus said in Matthew 16, I'll give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. The key is found in 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 3 through 8. Key verse, now the subject matter starting verse 3 is the coming of the Lord. Verse 8, very important. 2 Peter 3, verse 8. Peter says, but do not let this one fact escape your notice, beloved. Now when he says beloved, he's not talking to the world. He's talking to the church, to Christians. That with the Lord, one day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day. Now there's another scripture in the Old Testament that basically says the same thing. So what we have here is the key to understand the mystery, the understanding of God working for 6 days. Each day with the Lord is 1,000 years. So each day God was working. Day 3 He worked, 4 He worked, 5 He worked, 6 He worked. And after 6 days of work, God is going to rest on the 7th day. Now what this verse does, it explains to us that with God, a day is represented as 1,000 years. So this is where we're going to pick up in lesson number 8. Thank you for your attention.